Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. It's a pleasure to be back here with you virtually on OC Talk Radio. You know, for the last couple of weeks, Paul, I have seemed to be focused a lot of energy on the idea of navigating with no map. Now, today I plan to kind of continue with that thought, but with an entirely different take. This time, it's about when to go with your gut. Now, I'm a gut guy. I believe that humans have millions of years of evolution updating our knowledge of the role of intuition in decision-making. It has only been since the Industrial Revolution that we have begun to use numbers and analysis as fundamental guidelines for our significant choices in life. Although such a move has proven successful or helpful in science, I'm not so sure that it is much valid in making life-based decisions. You see, I think each of us possess this powerful internal GPS. I want to say GPS system, but that's redundant. That guides our ability to make good decisions, which I see are formed based on three primary influences: intuition, passion, and personal character. And today I want to pay primarily most of our attention to intuition, but we will get into passion and character. To help in this thought process, my guest is a successful and highly intuitive individual that has made significant life choices that, at the end of the day, have been based on very informed intuition or gut. I have known Ty Rose since about 1985 and have been privileged to witness many of his most important decisions. I so admire Ty, his intelligence, his contribution to society, and his strong belief in listening to his heart. Let's bring on Ty Rose and talk about our internal GPS and institution. Yo, Ty, what's up,
Charlie,
my friend?
how are you? Well, I am doing well. Thank you. Yes.
You're well. I am well. Paul is well. So we will see if the podcast ends well.
Well, I'm on, so how can it not end well, right?
That's great, buddy.
Well, you said internal GPS. I'm like 85. I remember our Tuesday lunches, Charlie. I don't remember what we talked about, but that was the foundation of our friendship from a long time ago. If you recall, we went to lunch nearly every Tuesday, and we've woven in and out of life at different occasions since then. So thank you. That was a very nice introduction. I'll try to live up to the platitudes that you give me or the nice things you said, but it's an honor to be with you once again on today's show.
Thanks, buddy. You know what I can't believe is that you remember the day that we met. I remember we used to meet weekly, but I certainly have no recollection of meeting on Tuesdays, but I'm confident that you are correct in that.
Well, I might have just made that up as we were talking before the show. It could have been Thursday, but for this conversation, it's going to be Tuesdays.
Okay, Tuesdays with Ty.
Yeah, and Charlie. Yeah.
Okay, so Ty, we discussed briefly, we didn't have a long phone chat, but just briefly, that I've been wrestling in this time of quarantine with the idea of navigating with no map, when our friend, yours and mine, Terry Hershey, reminded me that we indeed do have maps, but those maps are found within our internal GPS. So, in fact, we do have maps. They just look different than the ones we're most familiar with. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we do have internal maps, but what happens perhaps is that we tend to rely on the printed map, whatever that may be in life. And so maybe we get a little lax with our internal maps, and we don't necessarily rely on them as much as we did before all of this information being thrown at us, from so many different places. So definitely, I believe there's an internal map. And I don't know, maybe I trust that perhaps better sometimes than I do, I don't know, maybe an external map, if that makes sense. But yeah, when we're in an era now, we're in a time nobody knows how to navigate this exactly. We're all, we're trying to figure it out perhaps as we go along. But that might be the very reason that we need more intuition at a time like this, because there is that internal GPS that's maybe going to give us some guidance.
A bit of a story I read in my last blog. I had a quote from, I believe it's Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote *Sapiens*, a wonderful book. And he said, we have become so dependent on Google Maps and Waze, and it has been a nice application to help us get somewhere easily. But what we've done is that we've turned our faith in algorithms, and in the process, forgotten our ability to find our own way. That we start depending on science, and we can no longer find our own way because we are so enamored with science and with this data that we don't look to our internal GPS. I thought that was a quite insightful. And then talking about maps, you know what maps I like, Ty? I like the ones of the early explorers that there may be monsters here and the end of the earth. Those are.
And they drew them right onto the map, not like they had ever seen them, but those are, they're works of art, actually,
Oh, they are. They're wonderful, but I find they're truthful. They're as we're going along, there may be monsters here. You don't know, and the literal map doesn't know either. Now, Ty, we live what I'm calling, for those of us who can remember this far back, but I'm calling, we live in a Jack Webb America. Just the facts, ma'am. We glorify data and analysis, spreadsheets, lists, plus and minus columns. And so, after all the facts line up and appear to be true, they frequently lead us to unsatisfying direction. Have you ever seen that?
It lacks any creativity, perhaps, if it's all so analytical. And so it's like, well, maybe even going back to the map thought, that there are maps, like you said, the GPS or the app in my phone, for the most part, will get me where I want to go. But what am I missing out? I remember as a kid, we'd go on vacation, and I would sit in the back of the car with that. Remember those AAA triptychs, that they gave you, like a different page? Remember those maps?
Yes.
Did you ever have one of those? And you flip through it. But I love to read maps because I would look and I would learn from that. Say, okay, well, 20 miles ahead, there's a mile marker, and it may say something. And you know what? When your GPS doesn't tell you that. And so it's getting more creative and getting more into it. I'm not sure what that has to do with intuition, but it's not so sterile. There's a more creative part to it, I think.
Yeah, it's sans any kind of emotion, intuition, feelings. It's just all about moving from A to B. And in that process, I like what Harari has to say, is that we lose our ability to find our way. Because you know what I do, Ty? I will use Waze when I know the direction. Because I want to know what time I'm going to get there.
Yes.
Because Waze will tell me how long it will take, and if there's going to be traffic. I want total predictivity. I don't want to take a chance on anything, and that's just, that's missing out on so much of life and my ability. There's places that I go to regularly that I know I can't find the places because I mean, I only go to maybe once a month, and I can't find the places because I don't know them. And used to, I remember in the 70s, Ty, I never had a calendar. I would remember appointments, and I would have 4 or 5 appointments a week. And I would remember when my appointments were. I remember people's phone. How about remembering people's phone numbers?
I remember my parents' phone number. Of course, they're still living and they have the same house landline, but it's the only phone number other than my own that I remember because everything else is programmed for us.
I remember my phone number. It didn't have a prefix. It had Oxford 94249.
You're old, man, if you've got a phone number like that. I mean,
I had.
Can you hear me, Watson? Can you hear me? Yeah, that's back right after Bell made, I think, whatever, but nonetheless. Yeah, but you know what? Sometimes, though, when I want to go, now see, I just moved from California back to Missouri, where I grew up. Now I have a different appreciation for it now. Because when I was a kid living here and in my teens before I moved away to college, and then I haven't lived here since I was 18. Moving back to this area where I lived the first 18 years of my life, I'm relearning a lot of things because so when I need to go somewhere, I put it into my phone, and sometimes it'll give me 2 or 3 options. And I sometimes like to take the route that's not the quickest route. Because I want to learn and be like, oh, yeah, I remember that thing or that place or something like that. And so I find that I want to take a little different route sometimes because the freeway gets me there very efficiently, but I might want to take County Road HH to go to the next town over where my parents live because I like the view a little better, or it's a 2-lane road, and I can look at, something more than just, well, we don't have traffic here. There's no taillights anywhere around you. It's so sparsely populated. But anyway, taking a little different route, and not just the sterile, here's the quickest way to get there.
It's funny, Ty, when we were working at the church, and I lived perhaps 5-6 miles from the church. Do you know I had 3 different routes, and I would follow one for a while, then I would go to another, then I would, just because I wanted to experience different scenery, just because I wanted a different drive, not the same thing. I wanted a novel experience.
Well, opportunity, now, I guess, to explore. Go ahead.
You know what I want to do? I am a primary left brain thinker. That's my go-to. But as you know, I have a very keen access to my right brain. So I have I work primarily with logic and data, but I am very keenly in tune with my right brain, with feelings, emotions, intuitions. And so, as a result, when making important decisions, I feed my mind with data and analysis. And when I have completed that effort, I transfer my decision-making to my gut for the final decision. I find both analysis and gut are essential, but the gut is going to hold sway over my analysis. And I like what Derek Sivers has to say, and if you ever get a chance to look him up, he's really quite great. He says, we have 3 decision-making facilities in our own personal ecosystem. Our mind, our heart, and our gut. And he says all 3 must be aligned in order to say yes. And he comes up with this marvelous saying, when all 3 line up, the answer is, or if they don't line up, but when they do line up, the answer is hell yes. And if they don't line up, the answer is no. If you don't have all 3 line up, it's a hell. So your response to a given choice is hell yes or no.
Why isn't it a hell no as well? Why can't it be a hell no, right? Well, not because I need to say hell one more time, but anyway. But the hell yes is a strong affirmation. Well, maybe there's a good reason to say, well, hell no. Let that be the strong affirmation as well. I'm not disputing what he's saying. I just find it interesting that there's a hell yes, but on the no side, you just have to say no, you know.
Well, but the no can be, see, the hell yes, there are no conflicts. You're in alignment. All three of your decision-making capacities are aligned. The no has to do with, well, I don't know. It's kind of positive. It's kind of negative. It's not a hell no. It's I'm not sure. And if you're not sure, the answer is no, according to Sivers.
Gotcha. So it's only a hell no if the mind, the heart, and the gut all three say no. Then it's a hell no. Otherwise, it's just a no. Gotcha. I get you.
Excuse me. Then it's a fuck no.
Well, I don't get to use the F word because it's not my show. But if you want, help yourself. Okay.
Yeah. I rarely use the word. It's going to, I'll probably get comments on it. Now, Ty, you are an expert in intuitive decision making. And so far in your life, your decisions have proven to be the best ones for you, your dramatic decisions. I'd love for you to talk about 2 or 3 decisions that you have made in the last 25 years. First, you completely reinvented your life. Then you dropped corporate America. And at first you dropped religious America. Then you dropped, not that you dropped God in your life.
Right.
You dropped the institutional religious America. Then you became an artist by dropping corporate America. And last, you left your home in Southern California for a totally new life in, may I say, Missouri.
Yeah, like a reverse of the Beverly Hillbillies kind of sense type of thing.
So tell me about the first one, Ty. I think that's a significant one, and I know it calls for you to be quite vulnerable, but I think it was so important because you were living a life that was, I don't want to say it was a lie because it was all you knew at the time. And when you discovered an alternative, there was some alternative that just rang so true in you and rang so true in your intuition and in your gut that you had to make some radical changes in your life. Do you mind discussing that a bit?
No problem. First of all, you use the term expert. When you become an expert, the people want to come to you for advice. And I find I don't give advice so much anymore. I like to try and listen and reflect. So I'll just reflect on my own life.
Okay.
When you say it, that was probably the biggest intuitive decision I've ever made, and one that I never looked back on in regret. As you know, I grew up in a very conservative Midwest religious home and culture. I went to college and seminary, became a pastor, and spent 25 years in ministry as a pastor. And I grew up into this life that was just maybe pre-described for me in some regards, although the profession that I chose wasn't. I felt that was a calling in my life. I truly do. But you begin to live, and I don't know that I've had a very creative bent, but was living a life that, like you said, I don't think it was a lie because there's something, it may not be the truth, but not necessarily a lie. So it wasn't the truth about me. The truth about me wasn't that I was heterosexual. The truth about me is that I am of same-sex orientation. But it was something that I did not know I couldn't accept or had no parameters for even how to deal with it. And so,
but I must say here, just so our audience knows, you were not a half-assed minister. You ran a significant ministry with thousands of children that adored you, and you brought truth to them, hope to them, love to them. Yeah. You're one of the most magnificent youth ministers I've ever met. And so you were extremely successful at that, and you had, we can't name the name of the churches, but they were some of the biggest in America that you were in charge of.
Right. Yeah, well, I grew up here in the Midwest in southeast Kansas, a little kid from the rural part of America. And over time, I was blessed and the opportunity to work, as you said, in one of the most largest and influential churches throughout in this country. And so I look back at that and go, well, how did I end up here? And it was only because that's where my journey took me. I didn't set out to go there. It's just where my journey and perhaps even my heart took me at times, and the doors opened, and that's where I found myself. And so, yes, I really reached the pinnacle, I guess, of my career. I don't know what would have been beyond that in terms of what I did, the joy that I had in doing it, the influence that I had, the lives I believe that I helped to touch, and that in itself defines a lot of who I am as a person, in that my life is committed to helping other people in many different areas. And in that season of my life and journey was found in working in the church as an ordained minister and all of the things that go along with that. But there was an inner part of me that near the end of that season of that 25 years in my late 40s that I began to understand and begin to really struggle with my sexual orientation, something that I had pushed aside and just kept living.
But it was haunting you for a long time, was it not?
Oh, definitely it was haunting me, but I had no parameters to deal with it. I mean, I grew up in like I said, a conservative environment to where, if you were gay, God didn't love you, and that line of teaching. Now, that's not the truth, not what I believe now, but when you believe God loves you, then how could you have a sexual orientation or be a person that is despised by God or hated by God or going to hell or whatever else you want to attribute to that? Okay, so it's a very difficult journey at times, because there's something about yourself. You don't know your real truth. And that's perhaps the struggle for me, is coming to a place where I needed to live a more authentic life. And so when you come back to intuition, or what you might say was the definition of life for me, there was nothing about the transition when I came to fully accept who I am, my sexual orientation, and that transition process. There was nothing in my life that would have said, oh yeah, that's the way to go. Nothing in writing that said, well, you should give up your career, your marriage, your job, your home, most of your friends or social circle. All of that vanished in a matter of
I can't imagine. Your intuition had to be so powerful, and your needs so powerful, and your disillusionment with where you were had to be so strong for you to absorb not just the misery, but the bad talk, the rumors, all that you had to take negatively. That intuition had to be so powerful to overcome that. And I imagine there had to be many of sleepless and prayerful nights of you saying, what the hell did I just do?
Well, I don't think there were questions about what the hell did I just do. I think in my life at that time, it was struggling to keep my head above water. Now, this wasn't about sexually acting out. It was about finding my true self. And I was not happy. All of the things I was supposed to be from a Christian perspective, having joy and peace and patience and kindness and all of these things that we would attribute to what my sister calls a good Christian. I said, well, then what is the opposite of that? A bad Christian? But anyway, that could be a whole nother conversation. But I wasn't, all of that things that throughout my life, I was supposed to experience, I wasn't experiencing. Why? Because I was living outside of my truth. And there was something inside of me that said, you've got to find that truth, because otherwise I was dying on the inside. Now, I wasn't suicidal, but I was just plodding along in life and dying on the inside, and the anguish and all of that, who knows what it could have led to. Some disease or some syndrome, probably they would name after me at some point, or however those things go. But nonetheless, that wasn't the journey. I was in the bookstore one day, and I picked up a book, being Stranger at the Gate, Being Gay and Christian in America, and I thought, oh my gosh, what could this be? And it was the open door to me reading that book, finding a therapist, and beginning to discover my true self. And so the sleepless nights that were there were not about, oh my gosh, what have I done? I never looked back, because there was something inside of me that began to affirm, this is who you are. And so from a spiritual perspective, let me say quickly, a spiritual perspective is like, a friend of mine said to me when I came out to very good friends of ours at the time, well, what are you going to do about God? Well, that God was all I had left, because everything else was stripped away or slowly fell away or whatever. And so what I found, though, was the real me. Now, for me, Charlie, that was the best trade-off I've ever made in life. Because
how long did that take, Ty, for you to make that comfortable? I can see you making the decision based on your intuition, based on your life, based on the way everything was, and your dissatisfaction and your discovery that you were taking a different track than is normal for the Christian tract. How long did it take for you to be comfortable with that decision? Certainly that didn't occur right away. There had to be questions, or were there not? Where you just right away said, this is it, I've got it?
I remember sitting in the therapist's office for probably the very first session, and it was a therapist who dealt with people very much in settings like I was in at that time. And he said, why are you here? I think I'm gay. Why do you think you're gay? Are you gay? And I said, well, because I love women. I think they're incredible and they're beautiful. But my connection in many ways in life, both emotional and not just a physical or sexual sense, but was with men. And so, I mean, in that session, he goes, okay, well, you're gay. And I'm like, okay, well, finally somebody said it and allowed me to have a safe place to say it. And the next step was, okay, I don't think I'm going to hell, but help me understand other ways of understanding this from a spiritual perspective. And so that was about 6 months of therapy before I actually was outed. But that came at a point of which then, because I was outed by someone, I didn't have a choice then to like kind of gingerly step into this. It was like, well, here we are, right? And it's time to move forward, And so in the aftermath of that, the dark nights of the soul were more about accepting the fact that when I lost this group of very close friends, like, well, then what does friendship really mean? Or what does saying that, well, I'll walk with you through anything in life mean when, well, this is something you can't walk through me with? Okay. And there was a learning process. And that, I think, took a long time. But there was this inner peace. I would, it was that time I started attending the Episcopal Church because I figured, well, there's a people who like God and they like gays, I guess, so let's check them out, right? And I remember I was during the prayer times in church. Some people, I'm not a big holy roll or hand raiser type of thing in the expression of my faith. But
well, the Episcopal Church fits fine then.
Yes. Well, yeah. So, but some people might pray with their hands held open and upward. Well, I couldn't do that because that would mean holding on to something. And some people might pray with their hands open, palms but facing down. As I'm sitting here right now with the pencil resting on the back of my hand, I couldn't pray like that because I was still holding on. So I prayed with my palms open, but in a vertical position, because there I released everything.
Yeah.
Because so much was falling. So there was no holding on, because what happened is this purest form that I know of for me was in finding my true self. There was nothing that could have, there might have been some books in psychology or whatever, but if I'd have sat down and wrote down, okay, when you make a decision and you write down all the pros and cons, well, there were no pros. There was a pretty short list on the pro side to coming out, and the cons were a long list, right? But
those lists, I used to really advocate those lists, and now I'm not really that confident in them because they're so analytical, and they don't take into account feelings and as we said, intuition. And Ty, since you've made that decision, I found you to be a quite intelligent and quite caring and compassionate and loving person. But there is something, since you've made that decision, of a sense of personal acceptance and really, I have to say, a kind of not giving a shit what other people think. I mean, you do. Well, it's not that you don't care what other people think, but they're not going to influence you in your decisions.
Well, you know what? I can't expect that everyone would agree with the decisions I make. I don't agree with the decisions a lot of other people make. But the reality is, it's my life. And so what happened in that process and finding the true me is that no one else gets to define me anymore. I get to define myself. And yes, I've made wrong decisions in this journey, but I made a lot of right decisions as well. And what I find is there's no roadmap for this. Okay, so you do have to trust your gut in this kind of process. And in doing so, Charlie, was the best decision I ever made. Living some other life that really wasn't me, and finding the true self, the true me, a whole different world opened up to me. And so, as you know, that was the first remake of my life in my late 40s. As we laughed about it briefly before the podcast, like when I made the decision to move back to Missouri, and I told my friend Donna, who's like a sister to me, I've known her for many years, and I said, I can't believe I'm recreating myself one more time. And she goes, yeah, and it won't be your last. And I'm like, well, thank you very much, right? But
for the encouragement, yeah. But Ty, for our listeners, how do our listeners who've been raised in a left brain oriented culture as the United States, how do they even begin to access that intuitive part? There's a voice, I find it in contemplation and in solitude, in reading, various different people. I find access to my intuitive side, but if you don't have those sources, how is that discovered, Ty? How do we remove ourselves from the tyranny of the analytical?
You have to turn off the noise. Okay, so the noise, then you have to decide what the noise is for yourself. But you have to find those places and spaces where you can maybe it's wrestling with yourself. It's wrestling with what something inside of you is telling you. Well, when you fill your head with noise, like I used to have the radio on all the time. I don't know if that was a thing that I just wanted noise. And now I don't listen to the radio perhaps as often as I used to, you know. I'd listen to book on tapes or things of that nature. But when I fill my head with everything else and I'm not listening to me, because there is that quiet and still voice inside of us, that intuition, that inner person, that perhaps that right brain that's not just, it can't be found in the list of the pros and even the cons.
No.
It's something that tells us inside this is the thing that we must do. And to me, it's if we're living our life, perhaps even in the first 40-some years of my life, living it for the expectations of everyone else, which becomes perhaps for some of us, maybe for me, was even my own self-expectation, is that I live my life as prescribed by everyone else.
Oh yeah, because
so
you're trying to satisfy that ego that is the acceptance, the accomplishment, the I'm okay, and it's by a social standard. It's not by an internal GPS standard. There's a whole different standard, and that's why I fear far too many people die with regrets, and I certainly don't want to do that. I was listening to, I'm a big fan of Richard Rohr now, and Richard was talking about having times of silence. And I'm thinking in the car, and I was driving in the car, listening to a podcast or listening to music, and he said we need silence and solitude. And so I just started turning off the radio and just driving and just thinking. And, Ty, I've got to tell you, it was quite uncomfortable. There was times it was wonderful, but it was quite uncomfortable because I'm used to distractions.
Well, I think we all are used to distractions. There are so many distractions around us. So how do we access that intuitive gut part of us? You have to reduce the noise, and you have to just relax and take in and be still and let things, like I told you earlier, one of the things I love about my new home here is I have this beautiful deck, and behind me is a couple neighbors that I get to see their beautifully mowed lawns, not just mine, but it's this very pastoral setting. And I will sit there in the mornings, I'll take my two dogs out and pet them and let them play and just sit there. Maybe I haven't even had coffee yet, and just I don't have to think about anything. I'm not planning my day. I'm just sitting in silence. Or before we started, somebody mentioned the birds in the background or whatever, or even like as the evening begins to fall. I love to sit there. There's a sense of solitude and a sense of peace, and it's setting aside the noise and finding space just for ourselves, And
at the risk of repeating myself, I know my listeners know that in January I took a 10-day retreat, and 6 days was sequestered silence. No books, no computers, no phones, only a handwritten journal. And I was sequestered. I had this little tiny room, and I had a 6-foot or maybe a 10-foot square area out in front of the room. And I had to stay in that. And that was the first 2 or 3 days, the monkey mind went crazy. But after that, the learning of that, Ty, is incomparable. I don't know that I've ever experienced anything like it.
Well, undoubtedly you haven't, right? I mean, maybe that's the cleansing part that first 2 or 3 days, like you said, the monkey mind is learning to be still. And I think that's probably an issue for many, many, many of us, is finding time to be still, because we find ourselves always on the go, But we're
not taught it. We're inculcated with busyness. We're inculcated
Well,
with.
Not these days because we're locked at home. So maybe that's the time
Yeah.
for us.
But how many people are handling it well? I don't know. And some people have it. I mentioned it. Some people have it good, like those of us that are introverts. We're happy with it. But what about the people that have unhappy marriages? What about abusive relationships? What about people
Parents
that are extreme extrovert? This is a very, very challenging time.
Yes. Well, like we said earlier, I think as an artist, you live in your own head a good amount of the time, and I have no problem. I mean, there are times in my life I may not talk to somebody for 2 or 3 days, or even get in the car and go anywhere. That was pre-COVID, right? So, for me, it's not as difficult. I can see for others it might be. But, we keep hearing these things. Well, if we go through this time and we haven't learned anything, then what's been the purpose of it from a personal perspective? And, it feels to me like this is a time to reset. So we see these things that keep telling us how the earth is resetting itself in some regards, like the water's cleaner in the canals in Venice, and there's fish they haven't seen, or they can see the Himalayas from parts.
You talking about Venice, Italy, or Venice, LA?
No, Venice, Italy, yes. Yeah. And are the Himalayas, they can finally see them from parts of India where they haven't seen them for decades, right? So it's a time of resetting and maybe coming back to, more of a connection with ourselves. But even the extrovert has got to find some time for themselves, right?
Absolutely.
But now
the extrovert does not mean that they don't need times of solitude. They don't require it like an introvert, but it is necessary for them to process the information that is going on in their head. Ty, you know what I want to do? We've talked about intuition, and we just have a brief amount of time left. But I talked about a GPS, and I talked about three aspects of GPS, of our internal barometer. And intuition, I think, is the most powerful, and we really need to go with our intuition. And we didn't even get into your others. And I just will state that you were a businessman who decided to be an artist and had no idea if you could make money being an artist. And you started painting these magnificent paintings, acrylics, and they are just, they're glorious. And you doing a lot of experimentation with them, and that's got to be a big satisfaction in your soul as well, right?
It's a huge satisfaction. The point there too, I think, in what we're talking about between left brain and right brain, and I paint with acrylic. So you learn the mastery, or at least you learn a lot about the materials, but there comes this place to where you just have to let go. And so that's in a lot of my art, is not manipulating the materials to do what I want them to do. It's the experimentation, or maybe the intuition within the paint itself in terms of how things come out.
It is the intuition. It's your soul's. It's your soul. When you're in a flow, it is not a conscious effort of you painting. Don't you think? It is like it's like a muse speaking to you, and the direction is coming from outside of you, and you are an amanuensis, or a translator of this vision that you are getting. Did you get that feeling?
Oh, well, very much, at least in the style in which I work, because it's more abstract in nature. And so as you get into the process, then things begin to come forward. And if I'm following a little sheet of techniques and how to do this, this, and this, then I miss the miracle, or the happy accident, or the aha moment that comes about through a piece of art. And some of that is the release of saying, I stop trying to control it and let it come forth and see what happens. And sometimes you do that and you go, that's a shitty piece of art. But you know what? There's something called gesso, and you can paint right over that shitty piece of art, and you can start over again, right? A little, but that's the way life is, right? Not everything you paint.
I once saw a film of Picasso where he just continued. He would paint this magnificent painting, then fill it with gesso and come over and do something else because he did not approve. You know what we're talking about now? We're moving, and I want to do this. Really, I want to do this in the next 5 minutes, which is impossible, but we will do it. What were, I said there were 3 elements to going with the gut. One was intuition. The other 2 were passion and character.
Yes.
Do you think that painting is more reflective of passion than it is intuition?
Perhaps I would guess I would maybe lean a little bit more to the passion. The intuition, maybe as I'm thinking about it, is like I've come to understand in terms of acrylics, at least the medium I work in, as to how the intuition as to what they will do. But then when I push them beyond that limit, there is something magical, and perhaps that's the passion that comes forward. That's I know how this is probably going to go, but then it's through the passion that allows something to just be birthed out of there that like, oh my gosh, what just happened here? And that, again, it comes back, another part of that is learning to be silent and to wait and to listen and to observe. Because if I'm so intent in what I'm doing, as an artist, the hardest part for me is to step away from the canvas. Because sometimes if I find when I get so ingrained and the closer I get to the canvas, then I lose the perspective of stepping back and seeing what has been happening. And so, I haven't thought about art from that perspective of the intuition and the passion. But the intuition is knowing how things, kind of in your gut of how this works, but then the passion is the exploration part, the what if, that, if we tried this, maybe let's see what happens, right? And if you're left brain, you miss out on that, right? It's
yes, you do. It is a right brain function. I was listening the other day to an interview with author Dean Koontz. Are you familiar with Dean Koontz?
Yes.
And, he's very prolific. And he was talking about writing characters and being shocked as he's writing characters, the personality that they take on and the behaviors that they take on that did not come from him. He had no idea. He was so engrossed in the character took over the writing, and the character dictated to him how the character wanted to respond. That reminds me of the kind of painting that you're talking about, is that you're painting, and before you know it, because I've had this experience in painting, all of a sudden the painting takes over. The painting, it just overwhelms you, and it's going in a direction that you had no intention of taking it, and yet it's the right direction. It's the direction your soul wants to take it, and whether that's intuition or passion, I like to look at it as passion because it's part of my creative spirit.
Yes.
So I want to move to one last thing, and then we're going to close. I want to move to the third element, and I think it's important these days in the political atmosphere that we're dealing with, and that is going with your gut has to do with going with your character. And it has to do with kindness, empathy, understanding, care of other people, of producing something that is worthy. These are character traits that we learn, that are ingrained in us when we, from early childhood, but we also learn and we adopt. We can, our character is not set at 5 years old. We can adopt character qualities as we come to appreciate them. What do you think the role is of character in making gut decisions?
Well, character to me would seem like it's a foundation for making gut decisions. So as you're talking about that and our previous conversation about my coming out, I don't know that my character changed, Charlie, in my coming out.
It did not. No, it did. I can tell you as an experienced observer, it did not. It was
enhanced, right? And so that character of being an understanding person, if you don't have character, intuition and passion are shit, frankly, okay? Because if you don't have the character is the part I know that I can trust you. I have journeyed with you. I believe you. I know Charlie's character. I know that Charlie calls me up and tells me something or asks me something or some advice that he gives or some reflection he gives because I have known you and there is character there. And so the character is a perfect balance to the intuition and the passion. The character perhaps is the foundation that brings our feet back down to the ground and holds us as solid there as the passion may take us a little more heady or a little more flighty or whatever, but the intuition is giving guidance as well. So I think you've got to have all three of those. Otherwise, it's a no, right? Instead of the hell yes, right?
Absolutely. Good way of putting it. Thank you.
It's that character that I think keeps us grounded, that when things begin to, they all weave together. It's like you've got to have all three of them in life to navigate successfully, I guess I would say. So
yeah, and character is a behavioral thing. How you're behaving, it really has a lot to there's an internal part, obviously, but it is expressed externally in how we treat other people and how we care about other people. I'm reading St. Teresa of Avila right now. And, I'm doing, as many know, I'm doing this study in the mystics and contemplative prayer. And she is very adamant about, she's a big reader and she studies intellectual knowledge, but she says experiential behaviors are much more important than intellectual knowledge. And that she says the primary goal is not to think much, but to love much and find avenues in which you can express love. And that's a character issue to me. That's a who you are internally. And that's very critical.
It's who we are internally, but it's also is how we express ourselves in the interaction in life with other people.
Exactly.
Where the intuition and the passion are perhaps more of our internal processes, but character has to do with how we live our lives, on an ongoing or daily basis. Because if a person lacks character, if you don't trust somebody, you don't care what's in their intuition. You don't care how passionate they are about, you don't place yourself into their care. You wouldn't go on a journey with someone who didn't have any character, but they were sure excited about where they were going to go, and they could read the stars, or, they had an intuition about what berries you could eat along the way and what you can't eat, But if they didn't have any character, if they were untrustworthy, you wouldn't put yourself into their hands. And so maybe it should be the same about us, that we've got to have a balance in all of those. With a lack of any one of those, well, like I said, I've been baking, God only knows, way too much stuff around here. I bought a 25-pound bag of flour, and I'm like, is it hoarding? No, I just bought one bag, But if you're going to put something together, you've got to have that balance for it to come out of something that's edible, right? If you're going to leave out an ingredient, well, then why were you even doing it? It's not going to be what you had hoped that it would be. So that weaving of intuition and passion and character are all, I think, critical in this. So what would I say to your left brain people is, you've got to put your big toe in the water and just give it a try. And, you or I haven't got to where we are just overnight. It's something that takes time. And relax, relax with it.
Yes.
And and then you mentioned, those people who are struggling during this time. I mean, you and I laughed earlier. I'm like, I don't need to see anybody. Amazon delivers, and so I'm happy. But for those who are struggling in abusive or unhappy marriages or abusive family situations, or are living in fear financially, or families who are unable to take care of their family and feed them, and all of this during this time is these are the tragic stories that we hear. And so, that for those of us who, like you said, we can be in our solitude, and that's okay with us. But not everybody is are in the safe spaces and places like we are. And my heart, goes out to them. And I listen to NPR, and I hear some stories that just, they're heartbreaking. And I hear other stories that are encourage my heart to say, this is what humanity is capable of, on the good side and on the ugly side as well, our lightness and our darkness. And my hope is that during these times, that our intuition, our character, and our passion will help us all to embrace the light within us.
That is so well said, and I think that is a good conclusion to what we are having to say here. Thank you, Ty. Thank you so much. What a privilege to have you on the show to digest your wisdom for all of us. Thanks, buddy.
Well, Charlie, thank you. It's always wonderful to chat with you, and I hope your listeners got something out of all of this expertness that we've been expounding in the last hour. And, you're making me think today, too. And so I'm going to take my dogs out. I think we've got our new chain link fence up in the backyard. It's been completed. We've been chatting, and we're going to play ball with the dogs.
Okay, buddy. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank all our listeners for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie. And I'd like to encourage you to check out our website at thenextchapter.life. We have blogs, we have podcasts, and some of, I must say the last 2 or 3 weeks of blogs I've been very pleased with. I wish you'd check them out. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.
You've been listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie right here in Orange County's only community radio station, OCTalkRadio.net.